and welcome to this course. I am Dr. Sriram Kumar. Today we are going to learn the important applications of this carbon nanotubes. In last class, we had discussion about carbon nanotubes and we understood what is carbon nanotube and types of those carbon nanotubes. For example, single wall CNT and multi-wall CNT. And further, we understood the properties of these two types of carbon nanotubes, and we understood the important properties of carbon nanotubes. For example, the most important properties is the structural properties of carbon nanotubes. So whenever the graphene sheet, when it roll up, so based on the kind of this rolling up, we have three different kinds of the chirality of carbon nanotubes. One is armature, zigzag, and the chiral. So based on this chirality, we will have metallic or maybe the semi-conducting carbon nanotubes. And here's the important thing we need to remember here is that, so here the armchair CNT is the metallic in nature, and the zigzag and the small chiral are in the semiconducting nature. And further, we understood the mechanical properties and we compared the mechanical properties of the carbon nanotubes with the high tensile steel carbon fibers with the multi-wall CNT and single wall CNT. And we found that the carbon nanotubes are highly stable as compared to these materials. Further, we understood the electrical properties of these carbon nanotubes, and we, based on kind of the chirality, these materials may be the metallic or the semiconducting, and we understood the difference between the conductivity of the metallic, for example, copper, silver, and the gold with the multi-wall CNT and the single-wall CNT. And we also found that there's important properties of the CNTs, the ballistic transport. So ballistic transport means that whenever the electron moves from one location to other locations without any kind of scattering is called the ballistic transport. And we also understood this quantum effect of this material, and further we understood the thermal properties of the CNT. We understood the high thermal conductivities, anisotropic heat transfer, and the thermoelectric properties of CNT. And we compared the conductivity with respect to this copper. And later on, we understood the optical properties of carbon nanotubes. So we can explain these optical properties of nanomaterials based on the confinement of electrons in that particular shape of those materials. I already discussed this concept in first class where we had discussion about the confinement of electrons in 0D, 1D, 2D, and 3D, and based on that we have the discretion in the energy level. And here, for example, in the case of this 1D material, for example, CNT material, we will have this two kinds of this conductivity. One is metallic and the second is the semiconducting materials. And here in metallic single wall CNT, we have the transition from V1 to C1. However, in the semiconducting CNT, we will have the transition from V1 to C1 and the V2 to the C2 level. And based on these transitions, we will have absorption spectroscopy, and we have the absorption, and at different energy level, we have this transition S11 and S22. So this S1 1 denotes the level of the transition from B1 to C1, and 2 is it corresponds to B2 to the 2 to the C2. So this and S is the kind of the semi-conducting, and M denotes the metallic in nature. And so based on these optical properties, these materials can be also used as fluorescence. So with this kind of the material, so we can use these properties of the materials in the optoelectronics applications, for example, in sensor and imaging devices. And later on, we understood the chemical properties of CNT, and we can modulate the chemical properties of CNT by the surface modification and the functionalization. So there are two kinds of the functionalization. One is the exohedral, and the second is the endohedral kind of modification. And so we understood in details about what kind of the modification we can perform. So I will make the separate video only on the chemical properties and the functionalization of the CNT, so that we will understand how we can approach to functionalize to the particular functional group on the CNT backbone. And that is really important in either in the energy application, or maybe in the biomedical application, for example, drug delivery, or maybe the sensing application, maybe the composite materials. Here we understood the difference between the single volt CNT and the multi-volt CNT in terms of the structural, electrical properties, strength, and the applications. So now let's understand what are the key applications of the carbon nanotubes. Once we understood what are the possible applications, then we will learn how to synthesize carbon nanotubes. So in this class, our aim is to understand here the key properties of the carbon nanotubes. So based on these properties, the metallic and the semiconducting connectivity of the materials, we can use the carbon nanotubes in the nanoelectronics and the electrical devices. For example, in the case of the field effect transistor, we need to use the kind of this material so that should have the ballistic transport. So that material should not escape electron while the transporting from one place to the other. And so because of this ballistic electron transport nature of the CNT, we can develop or use as carbon nanotube and as channel materials. For example, so this is the kind of the field effect of transistor here. So we have here the source, we have the here drain, and here the carbon nanotube is used as kind of the channel material. So what happens here? So electrons can move from here to there, source to drain, without any kind of scattering, and that makes the usability of this material in the transistor application. Second is application is we can use also in the integrated circuit because of the ballistic electron transport mechanism. So here we can make either thin film devices, integrated or scalable kind of the transistors application. And if you are more interested in this kind of the research, go in that reference and read in more details about how you should develop similar kind of devices for your applications. And we have another important application of the carbon nanotubes in the nanoelectronics application and the electrical devices. For example, there is a huge applicability of the carbon nanotube materials in memory devices. So till now we have a kind of the semiconductor materials, silicon-based semiconductor materials in memory devices, but that is the kind of volatile in nature, and that affected at the working principle and their performance get affected at a different temperature, or maybe either the stress and the strain. However, if we make the memory devices based on this carbon nanotube. So this is kind of the nanovolatile materials. And further, we can develop sensors based on the carbon nanotubes. So because it has the high sensitivity in terms of the electrical perturbation. So this will be more highly sensitive materials for the sensing application. And we can also develop kind of the chemical and biological sensor devices. And if we are more interested in the memory devices, how to develop, so you should go in that reference and read in more details about the memory devices. Okay, so our next important application is for the composite materials and the structure reinforcement. So here, this composite materials has huge application in a diverse area. Most important application in biomedical application is that kind of the medical implant. For example, knee implant, maybe someone has the hip implant, maybe the dental implant. So here we can use carbon nanotubes and reinforcement materials because carbon nanotubes have the highest tensile strength as compared to the steel. So we can make that so we can use as mechanical reinforcement materials in the polymers, ceramics, or maybe in the metals. So when we use as a reinforcement material there, so what happens, that can increase overall the strength and stiffness of the materials. At the same time, the carbon nanotubes have very low density. So that makes the advantage in terms of the high aspect ratio and with the lightweight, so that we can be used in the aerospace, automobile, and the sporting equipments industry. And further, these kind of materials can be used as a thermal and the electrical conductivity in the composite materials. So that can use maybe to dissipate the thermal energy and the electrical conductivity, and that is ideal for the advanced structural materials. So these are the kind of the important application of the in composite materials. So when you think about the energy storage and conversion devices, so here we in energy conversion storage application, for example, till nowadays there's a huge boost on lithium ion battery. So here we can use carbon nanotubes in battery applications so that we can increase overall the electron transport in that electrodes, and at the same time it has a high surface area, so that can overall improve the charge storage capability and the cycling stability of materials. So I can make a separate video on how to use if you use carbon nanomaterials like CNT and the graphene, how that makes more stable batteries and more high performance batteries. And the second kind of the application is the supercapacitor. So here, because of the high surface area and the connectivity, that facilitates the rapid charge discharge cycle, so that it can be used as supercapacitor material. And the third important application is the energy conversion devices. So nowadays, people are talking about the hydrogen powered vehicle, and in India, scientists are talking about this hydrogen powered train. So if you want to use that hydrogen power chain, then we can use kind of the fuel cell here. So that and if we use the carbon materials here, so as specifically carbon and steel, so that can that that is the support to the catalyst materials. At the same time, that carbon materials gives the distribution and efficiency of the catalytic materials on those highly surface carbon materials, and therefore overall the reactions becomes faster, and therefore you may get the more efficient fuel cell. So from that fuel cell, you are going to convert hydrogen gas to the energy. And so this energy is the electrical energy. Electrical energy. So we can directly convert hydrogen energy into the electrical energy. So that is the application of this fuel cell. And we have another important application is the field emission devices. So because of it has a high aspect ratio and a sharp tip of CNT, so that can make that the make it possible to emit electrons at a high voltage threshold, and because of that we can use as the field emission display. At the same time, it is possibility that we can also use carbon nanotubes in low powered X-ray generation in the system. And we have another important application is the optoelectronics and photoelectronics. And we also already understand about the fluorescence kind of this mechanism here of the CNT. So here we can use light emission and a detection application here. So here we can use as kind of the photoluminescence and the infrared emissions. For example, light emitting devices we can develop, and this photo detector for the semiconducting CNT. And we can also develop the optical sensors because carbon nanotubes absorb light based on the kind of the semiconducting and metallic nature. And we have S11, we have S2, and we have M11 kind of the band. So because of this kind of this band, we can develop optical sensors. So it has tunable absorption properties, and therefore we can develop a sensitive, variable, and specific optical sensor for based on carbon nanotubes. And next important application of carbon nanotubes are in the biomedical field, and that are the drug delivery system. Second is the imaging and diagnostics tool and the tissue engineering. So if you think about the drug delivery system here, so if you want to deliver drug to the specific tissue or maybe the cell, so we can use CNT here. So we have CNT. If we have CNT here, and if we have CNT here, right? If we have CNT here, and if we just functionalize the surface or functionalize surface of the CNT with the antibody, and we load the drug in that CNT, so we can specifically transport that drug to the specific tissue or maybe the cell. And because of this carbon as the backbone, we have a lot of those room for the surface modification and functionalization, and that makes it the biocompatibility in nature. And the second important application is the imaging and diagnostic tool. So whenever we use the functionalized CNT, for example, if we use here the ferromagnetic material in that CNT, suppose that we have this ferromagnetic material in the CNT, and when it delivers to the cancer cell using that antibody there, so that can be used in the imaging contrast. So if we use in the MRI application to diagnose where is cancer cells present in the body. And we can also make the nanocarriers for the targeted diagnostic molecules. And third important application is tissue engineering here. So because of the mechanical strength and the flexibility of the CNT, these materials can be used for fabrication of the scaffold that mimic the tissue properties. And here the CNT can also be used to support cell growth and the tissue regeneration. So these are the important applications of in biomedical field. And the last application is the environmental application. So in environmental application, we can use CNT for those membrane. We can use as a membrane here. So we can use CNT as a membrane. So if we use the CNT as a membrane, and suppose we have here the membrane. So if you have the membrane and we have here the water, and if it is pass this water from that membrane, so we have here the, so if it is dirty water, and so we will get here the purified water. So what happens? So we need to develop purifying membrane here, so that can purify the water, and that CNT can remove the contaminants, maybe the heavy metals and maybe the organic pollutants. So it depends on how we functionalize the backbone of the CNT, and based on that backbone functionalization, we can selectively remove the specific contaminants from that water. And so we are going to learn in more details about how we need to develop a CNT based membrane for the water purification and the air purification process. And the second important application of CNT in environmental application is that we can develop kind of the catalyst based on the CNT composite materials here for the environmental remediation process. So if something is there in the environment and if you want to remove that contaminant, maybe from the air, maybe the water, so that is this kind of this environmental remediation process. So here we are going to develop some kind of the catalyst, so that can improve overall the reaction rate and the selectivity to that particular contaminant in the water system. So these are the various kind of application of the CNT. So it depends on your application of what and where you want to use CNT. So this is a summary of the application of CNT. So we understood the application in electronics. So these are the application in the transistors, nano, interconnect just memory devices, sensors, and here which properties of CNT is used to to use in the electronics application. So this is the field of application, and where you can apply it, and which properties of the CNT you can use to that particular application. For example, in the composite materials, we can use in aerospace, structure, automobile, sporting equipment. So here we are using the high tensile strength and high aspect ratio and low weight of material, so that we can use in the aerospace materials. In the energy storage application, for example, in lithium-ion batteries, supercapacitor, maybe the fuel cell. So here we are going to use electrical and thermal connectivity of CNT and the high surface area of the CNT. So depends on the application, we should focus on the kind of these properties we should use in that particular application. For example, in field emission, we are going to, for example, we have the field emission display, maybe X-ray sources, low voltage X-ray sources. So here we are going to use the properties, for example, low turn on electron emission, sharp nanoscale tips. And next one is optoelectronics application. In this, where we can use as a photo detector, maybe light emitting devices, or maybe the optical sensor. So here we are going to use the photoluminescence properties of the CNT for the optoelectronics application. And in biomedical applications, for example, we can use either in this drug delivery application, imaging, contrast, tissue engineering, scaffold. in the tissue engineering applications. So here in the biomedical application, we are going to use the chemical functionalizations and the mechanical properties and the surface properties of CNT. And in the last, we have an environmental application. For example, we can use in water purification, membrane, maybe we can use the catalyst development. So here we are going to use the large surface areas, absorption properties, and the chemical stability of the CNT, so that make ideal material for environmental application. So this is all about the application of CNT in different area of research. In next class, we are going to learn how to synthesize carbon nanotubes. So here we are going to learn the synthesis of carbon nanotubes using three different methods. One is arc discharge method, second is laser ablation technique, and the chemical vapor deposition. And later on, we will compare the methods, and based on the comparison and quality of the CNT, we can choose based on our interest. Okay, see you in the next class.